Hi, welcome to another episode of I Mustache You Something. I've got I mean, I don't think world famous is, a stretch. Azer Bestavros. I yell at people when I say like, oh, Azer Bestavros, and they're like, who? I'm like, what do you mean, who?
Okay, Mina, just keep going. Don't dwell on this. Come on.
Yeah. Don't dwell on this. So, I think it's worthy. Two things are worthy of mention. That again, if someone doesn't know who you are, like they should look at Wikipedia. Um, One thing that I think is pretty cool is that your dad was Atif Bestavros, uh, and he was the youngest member of the Majlis al-Midli in the 50s under Pope Kyrillos. Um, and I think from that lens and from that perspective, you've taught me and a lot of youth in our community the cyclical changes that our community and every community really, it's not just the Coptic Church, but every community goes through these cycles of different waves of how decisions are made. So it's been really interesting learning from you about your dad and everything like that. Um, and the other thing that's again, I'm like you like why don't you don't what? So what's your title now? It's associate provost,
That's correct. Associate
right?
Provost for Computing and Data Sciences.
And you were a computer science professor at BU, and then you were promoted to chair, and then you established the Hariri Institute, which is like an interdisciplinary computer science that instead of everybody does their own thing, works collaboratively with other departments at BU, and then they said, well, you know, everybody gets a college. We're gonna make a new
No, not quite that way.
so they established a new college for computing, and they're building a new building that you post pictures of on Facebook. That's like an awesome like structure, at least in the idea phase, that's being built out right now. And they made you the associate provost for that college, which is really really cool. Um, so I, I mentioned in introducing this um, whatever it is, podcast, video cast, YouTube series, mustache, Movember thing, that some of the people that I'm interviewing are people that I consider to be mentors, people that are uncles to uncles, because I wore this shirt actually because a lot of the people listening to this were not born in 1993, and I'm old enough to have a shirt from 1993. So you're an uncle to an uncle. Uh, so you listened to another one of the interviews with Dr. Ahmed Mossad, and you're about to share with me your reflections, and I stopped you and I said, no, stop. Let's hear that on the recording, because I was telling you that I talked to you, I talked to him, I talked to Uncle Rafit. There's a handful of you guys that every time I talk to you, no matter what we're talking about, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna, like I told you, I said I'm gonna go start from scratch. Like I don't, I thought I had this thing thought through, but like I need to start from scratch. So what are your reflections on uh, the interview with Uncle Ahmed?
See, I didn't know him, so this was an introduction to somebody that is, as I told you just before we started, sort of a sense of camaraderie. Like I saw lots of things that well, this could have been my friend or is somebody I know somehow, but I haven't met before. And I feel like there's a lot that he talked about that spoke to things that I feel oftentimes not necessarily say, but um, so maybe another way to think about it is if we think that we're all members of a church, we tend to think about a canonical form, if you want. they look like this. But then when you see somebody who's really different, that resonates with a lot of things you feel. That was the feeling I got. Specifically when he talked about his background growing up and how joining the church and sort of how he was, not that close back in Egypt, but then, how he feels about it now. And so anyway, I think I saw this maybe 2 weeks ago, so not quite remember all the details, but the sort of the at a high enough level, I feel a sense of connection to people like that, even though I don't know them.
So
Very good.
what's the essence of that connection, you think? Like what's the substance of it?
I think it's the fresh thinking and the liberated thinking. Maybe that's another way to think about it. Just that it's very different from what you expect. I mean, obviously, somebody very successful, very I don't know. It's not what I expected. Let's put it this way. You have a question?
What did you expect?
I don't know. I think maybe, if you're, well, I expected somebody interesting because of you. So I knew there has to be a wrinkle to it, right? But I didn't know what it would have been. And I think it's somebody who was very different from me, yet very similar in a way. So in terms of background, in terms of profession, in terms of growing up, I mean, you mentioned, I grew up in a family where my dad was, and I was very close to the church back in Egypt. But in a way, even though we came through different paths, I see a lot of things that we share, even though we're different. So I don't know what I expected, but I expect somebody interesting, and believe me, that was the case.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of people coming up that I've recorded with already that haven't posted, that take interesting just to an entirely new level. And Alex Fahim, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I told Alex, I said, like, you're interesting, but these guys from Canada, Yusuf and Ray, make you look boring.
Okay, I'm happy to be boring now because.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, like, listen, like, so this is something that I think has come up over and over and over and over again, which is this identity paradox, where we are trying to figure out who we are, and we're trying to figure out how to exist in a community, and everything is not clear as we want it to be, right? Like conversations with my friend Nadia, who is Paul, you know Paul Kist, his sister, who lives in Kenya, and she identifies herself as Coptic American. She hasn't lived in the United States in 16 years. She left the United States when she was 24 years old. Like, if anything, she's she's more Kenyan, right? And like Coptic ethnicity. But we feel like we have to find these labels, right, that are clean and clear. And when you talk about Uncle Ahmed, how he's I forget what the word you used was, but like open-minded, or free thinking, or flexible, or you use the word like that. But in the conversation, he mentions having humble obedience to the church and humble obedience to our community, as we serve our community. So it's not, there's always going to be this counterpoint, and if we are looking for something to be clear, we're going to be confused. But if we embrace the paradox that Nadia is as much Kenyan as she is Egyptian, Coptic, Christian, American, like all of those things into one. And Uncle Ahmed and you are, yes, like, you know, compared to Ray and Yusuf and Alex, boring and, you know, like, you know, clean cut and, you know, like professional guys, but it's not that clear and it's not that simple, right?
So let me jump in and say you're thinking about it from different people who. So when you look, but I'm actually thinking within each one of us. I can see within me multiple identities. So the question is, I'm a scientist, but at the same time, I'm a Christian and a believer. That a big part of my life is about sort of reconciling these two things. How do I speak, to what I believe in versus what sort of is acceptable, let's say, as or reconciling. I mean, you mentioned a paradox. Maybe it's not a paradox; it's almost inconsistencies within our sort of feeling within the church. So, you mentioned obedience versus reform. Okay, so how do I reconcile these things? And you and I had long discussions about this. So to me, I feel it's when you see diversity in the community, it makes you feel good about the diversity within yourself. Because I can see somebody like Ahmed and says, I relate to that. It's part of me, right? And the fact that he's somebody that you are talking to and you sort of put in her, I didn't know him before. But to me, the fact that there is this diversity in people and you see them in different lights, right? Somehow it makes me feel more at peace with sort of the um, inner debate in my head, for lack of a better word. I don't know if I call it a paradox. I think it just in the nature of coming to grips with sort of our identities, Egyptian versus American. As I said, professionally versus culture versus faith. I mean, we can go on.
Right. Right. So how do you think that has
But I
played out?
think, but it's actually important to say that we don't do enough of communicating that it's okay, that this is to be, celebrated is maybe too much, but this is something to be comfortable with and to be. It's okay. It's okay. Talk about it. I mean, I think that's to me because I think there is a lot of this conformance that there is. And I mean, you started asking me the question of sort of. And I said sort of the diversities, conforming to it. You said me, what did you expect to see in a person? Actually, this is maybe we shouldn't ask questions like that. What you expect, right? That's because there's basically your question implies some sort of there has to be somebody, a Coptic professional, successful person has to look like that. I don't know.
But you're the one that said he's not what I expected, right? So
Yes,
let
I'm guilty of it too.
right let's let and I don't I don't know that you expected something, but if you did, let's understand that a little bit, right? Because if you and I and he are looked at as okay, like these sort of monolithic things, like oh, he's an associate provost of a college. Oh, he's a chair of anesthesia at he's X label, right? So of course he's going to conform to certain norms. Of course he's going to conform to certain expectations, and we don't feel that way. We're looking at ourselves going like, no, like I'm still figuring this out myself. Don't collapse my wave function and don't just assume that I've actualized myself as this specific thing that you perceive of me, right? But we like, and the question is, why do we expect that? Where does that expectation come from? So that even you and I, who don't agree with that, are still using that kind of language of he's not what I expect. Oh, what did you expect?
Well, so I think it's a good question, and it's fair, right? So I did say that. I also, when you asked me, so what did you expect? I said, well, I fumbled. I just didn't know what to answer because, well, I didn't know exactly what to expect. But I'll tell you, maybe the word I should have used was, I didn't know what I expected, but I was surprised. Like there's two different things. Like, so there's, I don't know, talking to Mina, I'm expecting people are going to be sort of thought-provoking, etc. But somehow, even though I expected maybe somebody who's not going to be your, you know, uh, boring, let's say, you can still see somebody who and say, "Oh my, this is." So I think that's what I meant. It's not, but when I use the word expected, when I use the word conforming, that's what I mean. Like, I think we are not doing enough in the church to word celebrate, but maybe there are other words to mean it's okay to express this uncertainties about who we are, or sort of how we and that we are still trying to come to grips with it, even though I'm close to retirement, I still can think that it's okay.
So I want more. I don't want just the diagnosis. I want the labs. I want the X-ray. I want the full analysis of this issue. Why? Why is it that we, or how is it, or what is it that we do as a community that makes people, including ourselves, feel like there's an expectation to conform to a certain set of norms, and our job isn't to give people space to self-actualize and become who uh, they are meant to be in Christ and within community in the church that's diverse, and be able to look around and say, oh, like, oh, that person's different. I feel okay about being different, like you said. And instead, we're a community that there's a social pressure to be a certain thing or a certain way. Why? How?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, part of it is cultural.
Okay.
Part of it is growing in independent of the church, just Egypt, just the Middle East, this sort of that culture, which is very male-dominated, sort of hierarchical, sort of older people versus young people, right? There is the sort of norms, and that's going to be the case no matter where you go, and that's part of it. So when you move to a country like here and you have a community, I think it takes time and it takes effort, and it's not comfortable for these a different way to think about society to sort of flourish. And so I think part of it is that, no question. I think part of it, and I think you and I had the discussion about this a while back. There's a difference between going out and being an activist and versus actually answering when somebody asks you. I didn't see Ahmed going out trying to make an activist of whatever he's thinking about, but it's when you ask him, he did answer, right? So I think we don't do enough of that. We're not doing enough to find out about each other. We are waiting for somebody to tell us. And of course, what people are going to tell you is what, who's going to tell you is going to be the people who are in a position to tell you, the priest, the pope, whatever. Okay? So, but the church, while hierarchical, also has your peers. And the question is, are we finding out each other? And right, when you ask me a question, I would answer, I'm not trying to change you. I'm not trying to tell you what is right or wrong. I'm just telling you what I am, what I feel, what I think, which is very different than giving a sermon and telling people what sort of. There's a different when I teach, okay, so let's talk about it this way. When I teach a class, I'm the professor, and somehow imparting my knowledge, right? Now, this is very different than when I work with a graduate student, but both of us are actually at a loss as to what is it that we're trying to do research on. In a way, we are peers. And then they can ask me a question, I will answer. Actually, this is good. Let me tell you something I tell my own students. So you know how it is in grad school, right? In grad school, you go work, and it's not like classroom, it's not courses. It's literally an apprenticeship. You work with the graduate student, it's one-on-one. There is a level of comfort you have to develop with the student, if you are a faculty, and with your professor, if you are a student, of basically saying, look, we are going to be exposing to each other our ignorance, for lack of a better word. Just imagine this. Imagine I'm the professor and you're the student, and I don't want you to think that I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to be very careful about what I tell you, because if I tell you something that's stupid, you can say, oh, that's stupid, professor, right? That's not a healthy relationship between a graduate student and a faculty. All that has to go away. In other words, you have to accept the fact that I can say something totally stupid, and I have to be comfortable knowing that you're not going to go out and embarrass me, and vice versa. Like, when you say something wrong, I can beat you on the head, say, well, what do you think? This is wrong, right? And I can prove it to you that you're wrong, right? I'm not going to go out and then tell everybody, hey, by the way, Mina, this, he's such a bad student, he made mistakes. That is not the relationship in a one-on-one sort of exploring space, etc. So I think there is these two types of communication. A type where I feel responsible for what I'm saying because you're going to take this and consider it a fact somehow. You're taking it from me as somebody who's teaching you, versus this peer exploration, let's say. And I think in our church, we don't have enough of that second one. We're trying to do it with youth groups and so on. But when we tend to sort of focus more on sort of, well, how do you reconcile X with Y about what the church is saying versus maybe what we're living? Instead of, how about, what do you think about this, independent of anything? And then when you see that the same community that you're in has the same uncertainties and same questions you have, that's very reassuring. And I think that's very empowering, actually.
Do you
Am
think
I making sense? Did I answer the question?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. And like I'm matching what you're saying with the reality that I've experienced, and I think you're 100%.
And speaking for somebody who came from Egypt, and I think you should maybe confirm that and ask other people. Back in Egypt, we don't have that. We don't. We go to church and we go back. It's home. It's yeah. Maybe we go to Sunday school. We don't have the opportunity to sort of open up with people who are not our family, who are not sort of the parents and the cousins and so on, right? You don't, and maybe things are changing in Egypt today when I was growing up. But remember, when you think about communities, change is very slow. Again, something else you and I talked about for a long time. You have to be very patient because it's generational. I mean, it's the time scale for change is the life of people, 40 years, 30 years, right? So when you think about what I'm talking about is what I experienced, I don't know, 40 years ago growing up. Well, it will take a while for things to change. I come to a country where, okay, I'll share with you this. The first 2 years of being a graduate student at Harvard University just totally transformed me. I came from there, strong believer, Sunday school, my dad, all these wonderful things back in Egypt. And my first week at Harvard University, okay, let's go have dinner. I cook something in the kitchen and sit with a bunch of graduate students from all over the world. And what do they talk about? Religion. And what do they do? Of course, they're totally, atheists or different religions, right? And I realized I cannot participate in this. I'm not ready. I don't know how to answer that question. They're just ahead of me. And what I realized is really, of course, I grew up in Egypt, never having to sort of experience that or deal with it. I had to learn that, and I had to sort of discover really how I, who I am and how I think about things. And all I'm trying to say is somehow we are still lagging in doing that today in our church, even with generations that are much younger than myself. And I think that that's where the answer to your question is.
So there's two things, and you can take them in any order, that set off some alarms here. One is the word change, and two is the idea that we don't have all the answers, right? Because if we think that we have something to offer, right, then like you said about, you know, the relationship between the professor and the graduate student, then it needs to be like, you know, we need to know what we're talking about, right? And this came up recently in a conversation with the high school servants where, as usual, I dropped the bomb of, you know, like, okay,
Troublemaker.
because I mean, we're talking about things.
I love you for that, Mina. Keep doing it. Never, ever stop doing that.
But like, I'm not doing, and you know, I'm not doing it to be a troublemaker. I'm doing it to clarify inconsistencies in what we're saying. And
Mina, you're doing it to precisely actually enable what I was just talking about a minute before.
Exactly. And the response that I got, not from everybody, like some people are like, oh, this is a good discussion. But at least one of the responses I got was, we need to have an answer for the students about this. And I said, no, we don't.
Yeah, that's right.
We need to encourage them to struggle with it like we are struggling with it now. It's not an answer to this theological question. It's a wonder about God, and it's a wonder about ourselves, and it's a wonder about how we live, not with clear, straight answers, right? And some people are not comfortable with that, right? Because if we can't give people answers, then what are we doing, right? It's not about the dialogue, and it's not about correcting each other and like, oh, like, do you think you said that the right way? Or do you think like maybe taking a different perspective is going to balance that out a little bit? So again, in either order, if you could address those two things that you said, because I think some people are very uncomfortable with us not having answers and for things to be more of a dialogue, and for you to say, change the church has been the same for 2,000 years. What are you talking about?
So the two questions. I'll start with change. That's probably a little easier. The word change, you can take it as there's something fixed and you're changing it. Or you can take it as there's something that's always changing. Right? So if it's the first one, of course, it's going to be shocking and you're now going to not be faithful, whatever. You can now sort of exclude people because they have sort of deviated, whatever the word is. So I think that if you just look, and you know what I'm going to say now, if you look at our history as a Coptic church, and if you think about the Christianity, going back from the apostles' time, it is changing. There is no question that it is a living body of Christ. It lives, and by definition of living, changes. So I think that change should not be scary if you understand that actually the only thing that is fixed is, you know, change is sort of the rule, not the exception. Now, you know, I have to be careful. You know, maybe the right word is evolution or sort of.
We don't say evolution.
No. Evolution in the way we think, evolution in the way we adapt, we move from society to society. We introduce, I don't know, internet and social media. These things were not there 5, 10, 15 years ago, the way we connect with each other. And there is no question that our even mental capacities change. I mean, you know, like you read research about how the eyes of kids growing with video games are, their brains are better at processing things that people like myself cannot do. Actually our bodies are even sort of adapting and changing to the world we live in. So why is that surprising then that society is different? Then change has to follow. There's no question. I'll give you a trivial example. So I grew up, Alexandria, sort of going to St. Mark's Cathedral in Alexandria, and I like to play the organ, the little keyboard, and to do sort of hymns and so on. At the time I'm growing up, this may surprise you, having a musical instrument in the church is like sinful. That's now we're going to be, introduce this Protestant ideas just because you bring a keyboard.
Right. And it falls into the slippery slope of
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, what's next? هنرقص في الكنيسة بعدين?
Okay, but I couldn't. I mean, whenever we play that stuff and sort of we sing with the keyboard, we just sound better and it's just great. And by the way, I'm not like I didn't read notes or anything. It was all, as they say in Arabic, sama', just by ear. Just I can come up with the tunes and all that. Why am I saying this? Because it was at the time said, well, okay, everybody liked it, but you cannot really do it in the church. And then we had a priest, Shnood at the time, and I was sort of starting to serve a little bit in Sunday school. I says, why don't we do a special meeting, just get a secret almost, where you bring the keyboard for the kids to sing in church. Now, I'm saying this because I remember that was a big deal. I'll just go in and play, and everybody loved it and so on. But it was, we didn't want to make trouble. And then fast forward and look today. And you see all the beautiful music that comes out of, Egypt, from Alexandria, all these places. So, well, okay, it took lots of years, but what was thought of as something totally ridiculous changed. And, I know it's superficial, I know it's artificial, but still it shows that that's just a normal thing. And I expect that will continue. Things that today we think of as a little bit odd, that's going to be normal. So that's the first guy I don't want. You can ask me other questions if you want, but on the change question, I think I don't see it as a big deal. And there's maybe another thing I want to say is sometimes change exposes insecurities sometimes. And going back to the point about we have these conflicts within each one of us. And one way to keep these conflicts sort of under the hood and not talk about them to just try not to change, because maybe the changes will expose some of these things and then we don't know how to answer them. Which gets me to the second question you have. Is it okay do I have to have an answer? And you said, I think last week you said something about, so what are we going to answer? Or how do we answer this? Or we have to come up with an answer or something along these lines. And you said, no, you don't have to. Well, I have a different version from this, which is this you cannot ask that question. That's even worse, right? So one is, well, the question has been asked, now we have to come up with an answer. And the other one is, and there are questions you should not ask. That one even irritates me more. What do you mean there is a question you cannot ask? Of course you can ask every question. The reason people say this is a question you should not ask is because they know they will not have an answer. And since everything has to have an answer, then you should not ask the question, right? So I'm going backwards. I'm asking a different question, but it's related, right? So why do people say you should not ask that question? It's because they know they're not have an answer. So if you take it as not just acceptable, but actually normal not to have an answer, then sure, you can ask the question, you can discuss it, and with an expectation that maybe you will find an answer. Maybe we'll find an answer that will change. Because remember, change is part of the, you know. And by the way, these should not be very difficult, right? I'm a scientist. So actually, sidebar here. I'm both a scientist and a mathematician, and these two do different things. A mathematician and scientists are different. In science, you make hypotheses and you try to find evidence, and with math you prove things. And actually, so in math there's no second guessing. If I have a proof, I have a proof. If I don't have a proof, then I don't know, right? So that's one thing. But now let's talk about scientists. They make hypotheses, and the hypothesis tends to be wrong, and it's okay, right? So you give an answer, and then 5 years later, or even 2 months later, somebody else comes out there, oh, this person was wrong. So it's okay then to be wrong, to ask the question, not having an answer, or having an answer with an expectation that maybe it will change. But this is the best I can do now, right? Given, or basically say, I don't know, and it's okay. Just, maybe somebody in 20 years will be able to answer that question. So if we accept that for science, why is it not acceptable to think that there will be questions and it's okay? I can live with uncertainty. That's okay. And people actually may have even different answers, right? In science, if you have different answers, you have to show me why, and maybe we can compete. And by the way, sometimes you just make a hypothesis. You don't have an answer. It's just a hypothesis, right? Okay, anyway, so
you have made a defense for change, not as a choice, but as a reality.
Yeah.
You've made a defense for questioning and exploring and self-discovery and ideas evolving without us being dogmatic. And I mean, I don't need to say that I agree. And it's irrelevant whether or not I agree. But here's where I mustache you something. The prevailing sentiment in our community is that this is a fringe and dangerous perspective.
No, sorry, it's not.
And you and the people like you want to bring the church down with your ideas, and I'm already because when stuff like this comes up, I get anxiety because I know for every 5 minutes that I spend entertaining this idea in a public forum, it's going to be an hour on the phone going, no, I understand. No, yeah, no, you're right. No, we do have to teach the proper teachings of the church. I agree. But in addition to teaching the proper teachings of the church, we need to make it in a way that's applicable to people, where you're inviting them to live the life of the church instead of beating them over the head of the demands of the church. So,
I'm probably going to answer this. Okay. And I always say, well, how could we fringe if the whole entire history of our church going back to the apostles have that? It can't be fringe. Right? Now, it could be that we don't want to hear it. It could be that there's not enough of it, just that it's not fringe. Now, let me tell you what. I'm going to start with the early church. In the early church, just read what St. Paul talks about when there are disagreements. They're exposed, they're just talked about. Not just that, but St. Paul says, well, if something you think is good for you, you can do it, but just be careful not to sort of have other people be confused about what you're saying. Now, if the other people are not going to be confused about what you're saying, you should certainly talk about it. What's the big deal? But so if you think about that, just that one sort of message from St. Paul, it's about the freedom to think and to talk to peers and with others, and to be free to make a determination. Should I eat this meat or not? Okay, you know the context, right? So why is it okay to say that that there are these questions and that people can have different answers to them. And that you should just be careful of who you talk to and you exchange ideas with and so on. So go back to that very early stage and then go to our own history. You mentioned something about my dad and about Majlis al-Milli. He served in the Bay Council and all that. There was a lot of change that was introduced by folks like that. And it was changed at the time that was seen as fringe. And today, if you think about it, that is not fringe. That's actually what saved the church. I mean, Pope Kyrillos is the result of that happened just a couple of decades before. So if we recognize it, and these people that produce that change were exactly labeled as fringe, or at least sort of troublemakers. I'll tell you what is important here is the following: is if actually asking the questions, why are you doing it? Is it out of love and wanting to actually do the right thing, or is it out of just wanting to hurt the church? I think this is a big difference. This is a big difference. And from everything I've seen, there are these two. So, and you can see that people actually try to hurt and end up leaving. They actually don't stick to it. People who stick to it, again, you and I talked about this before, that will be very patient, because probably the change they're fighting for may not happen for them to see it. They're just doing it because they love the church, and that as part of it. They have to just be honest about how they think and how they see the church go and so on. So they're doing it out of love, and as a result, they'll stick to it even though they don't see the positive changes maybe they want to see in their lifetimes or soon enough. So I think that's the answer I have here is I question the fringe. I think the right answer is, well, maybe if more people talk about it, doesn't become fringe, because, well, there's a lot of it happening. Maybe the reason it's thought of as fringe is because there's not too many people asking these questions and forcing the question. And I think that goes back to what we started talking about, which is the difference between teaching and sort of and talking to each other as peers, like the faculty teaching versus the faculty working with a graduate student. These are two different modes. And maybe we don't have enough of that second one. And whenever we have it, it's seen as fringe because it's just not normal. It's not this is not what we have been doing. This is not what is experienced. But when it's not, and actually I think one of the reasons we have better ways to connect now and ask questions that we didn't have before. Seeing Ahmed and you interviewing him, that was not possible for me just 5 years ago. It's possible today because there's something called, I don't know, Zoom, and you have an interview and you put it on YouTube and I can see it. So the fact that we communicate in a different way, the fact that now you have somebody living in Kenya who associates with the Coptic Church and is sort of still part of the discussion, let's say, will make these less of a fringe and more the normal thing. Because, think about the young cops now on social media going and being activists about what they think and so on. So I think it's going back to the change theme. Maybe the change is that we have more of this, and maybe the change is that this is not going to be seen as a fringe, but actually as part of the evolution of our community.
So I think we've teetered on the edge of being controversial. I'm going to dive in to controversy if you'll allow me. One thing that I can't get out of my head, and I would not be able to continue the conversation if I don't bring this up, is the response to the sex abuse allegations over the last 9 months. And I think you know this, and hopefully anybody that's listening to this knows that the hardest thing to do has been to stay in the middle, where you reject the two extremes of burn the church down, like you said, like, you know, what are we trying to do? We're trying to support the church and we're trying to make the church a better community, right? And reject the other extreme of let's make out all the survivors to be liars, because if we can show that they're all liars, then, you know, we're going to, no, I mean, that's also foolish, because if someone has been harmed and someone has been silenced, then we have a responsibility to give people a voice and to give people a safe place to worship. So those aren't the only two choices. And the different mechanisms that have both continued, like certain efforts that were already ongoing that have continued and focused their efforts on this vein, and new efforts to organize and to educate and to respond, have fallen on a huge spectrum. Like some things that are being done by the diocese, some things that are being done by collaborative church and lay groups. And the reason I bring this up is because some of the work and some of the activism, and we're going to use that word because that's how they identify themselves, has been done by groups that are considered by the conservatives, if we're going to use a label, as fringe. So you know how I feel about this. I don't like any of the labels. I agree with you. It's not activism. It's just love for the church, and we're trying to make the church a better place. And if you're actually trying to break the church down, you know, like you said, like it fizzles out and we move on, right? But if someone does have a legitimate voice and does have a legitimate point and does have a legitimate concern, how do we evaluate that? And if we're going to say that we have the capability now, right? We have the technology, we have the capacity, we have the ego security as a community to be able to tolerate these questions and say, listen, let's hear you out. How do we do that? And what are the consequences of being able to do that more effectively?
I mean, this is a loaded question. I don't know if there is an answer. Going back to maybe not every question has an answer, but let me just say a few thoughts. I'm going to go back to the fringe question. And if you think about it, just define the word fringe. It's a small group out there that is really not in the middle. You know, typically in authoritarian regimes, just go politics, not church. You think of a fringe as somebody who is just a troublemaker outside this little thing out there. And oftentimes you're wrong, because if it is really a movement, you're just out of touch. So you think of it as a fringe. And actually people around you want you to think of it as fringe, because I'm talking about politics now. So think about I'm a ruler, I'm a dictator. And as a dictator, you know, people are just giving me headaches. They go on TV and they make statements and all that stuff. And everybody around me who's lying to me, or at least not telling me the truth, because they don't want to hurt me, because they love me. Okay, they say, hey, don't worry about it, Azer. You know, these people are, you know, just fringe. This noise out there. If you think about that, the reason I may believe them and the reason I may continue calling that is because I actually not part of it. I'm not living with them. I don't see that it's not a fringe. This can be the French Revolution for all I care. And I just misread it, right? So I think that whether it's fringe or not is not a call we have to make. It's a reality. If it's a fringe, it's a fringe. It's going to die out, right? But if it is really a movement, then you can call it a fringe as much as you want, but it's going to change things, right? So that's just the nature of it. So I think that I just want to go back to this. Fringe is not a label. It's either a reality, like it is really a fringe, and just people will just say whatever they want and it dies out. And there's a lot of that, fine. Or it's a reality, just a matter of people not being in touch. And I think for what you're describing, I have a feeling there's a lot of that second. The people who are discounting these things, they just are not connected. It's almost like the usual, again, in politics today, we have the red and the blue states, right? And believe me, yesterday I was talking about this here over dinner. What really irritates me is, empathy. Just if these people sort of see each other, they're not going to think of each other as they're not going to see the extreme on the other side as a fringe. Right? And the fact that that everyone is calling the other one fringe, actually, that's where you get the clash. How could, I don't know, 71 million people vote for Trump versus whatever for Biden? When you think about that, let's put it in the context of our church. Are the people that you call, I don't know, conservative, what did you call them, versus the activists? Could it be that they are not in touch with how big this movement is?
And I'm asking you this with a specific. I mean, there's a specific group that I have in mind that has been now labeled a non-Christian organization that self-identifies as a Christian organization that's just trying to serve people, and it's been flagged as, fringe troublemaker people. And I'm not going to say, oh, they are, or no, they aren't, but the thing that confuses me is, why not talk to them, right? Instead of issuing a label and saying anathema and saying we disavow whatever these people do, why not bring them into conversation? Why not bring them into dialogue? And in conversation, maybe there can be some alignment. Maybe there can be some, like you said, if there's this distance, right? Then there's an othering that happens where, oh, don't worry about, oh, it's gonna, oh, but you don't understand what they're saying. You don't understand why they're saying it. Then how can you just sort of dismiss it out of hand? And if you have a conversation with someone and they've been making a lot of noise, and it turns out because they don't like the way that the parking spaces are shaped in the parking lot. Okay, Habibi, let's talk about it. Meshi, that's fine. Okay. No, I understand. They feel heard. Great. We've moved on. Like, so.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to say quick. If you're going to engage and discuss and be part of, hear them out, you have to do that not just to hear them out and say, okay, Habibi, fine, whatever. You have to be accepting that you may be surprised and you may actually want to change your ways. So in other words, it is not enough to say, just listen to people just to make them feel good, that they have been listened to. Actually, I don't like that. I don't want to engage in a discussion just to make somebody feel good that I listen to them. But it's already predetermined what I'm going to do. So that, in other words, if you're going to do that, you have to approach it with being humble and realizing that I actually could change, and I could change the way I think about them. Maybe they're not fringe. Maybe they actually have something to say. So I just want to make sure that that's not why we sort of want to engage with people that maybe we have preconceived ideas of why they're doing what they're doing or what their motives are and all that stuff. Because then it's not sincere. Then it's not, and I think it has to go both ways. So if the other side also wants to engage with the folks who sort of they see as the problem and the ones that are not have not been responsible or whatever, if they, they'll start a discussion and they're not willing to see why the other side may actually think of them as a problem, then I think it's not worth it to have this discussion, honestly. So I think it really is, and I want to go back. Man, it's I didn't plan it that way, but it keeps going back to that two forms of communication: the sort of the authoritarian teaching, sort of, I'm imparting on you what I know, versus I want to learn from you, and I want to engage in something that we both change, we both sort of just evolve in how we think and how we grow and all that stuff. And I think that it's a second one. So if both sides would go into the discussion, not to be preaching at the other side, because of course these people can preach to the, the conservative, whatever, you ought to change, you have to do this and that, otherwise you're sort of old-fashioned, whatever they expect. And vice versa, you're fringe and you should change. So as long as both sides approach it with with an expectation that they may come out of it thinking differently about it. Then it's basically, and this is what we don't know how to do. I keep going back to this. We just don't know how to do this. We don't know how to go into a meeting, a discussion, feeling a little vulnerable, not a little, it would be a lot vulnerable. And the vulnerability comes from the fact that I may not have an answer. And I may look like I'm not in charge the way I should be. It's like I go talk to my student. Unless I let that go, it's okay that my student thinks that I don't know what I'm talking about. Then it's always going to be either we don't have the discussion or it's going to be to our detriment. It's not going to be a good discussion because, right? So I think going back, it takes two to tango, and I think that both sides have to have that willingness.
What if only one side has it? Is that good enough?
I think it's good. I don't know if it's good enough. I think it could be the prelude of the other side changing. So in other words, let's go back to sort of the parking space example you gave. Well, okay, so maybe I want to listen to you, right? And I'm already predetermined in what I want to do. At least you may hear something that would say there is now a possibility that, oh, actually we should just redraw these parking spaces, whatever it is. So I think not having the discussion is the worst. If the discussion is maybe more of a one-way, but not preaching. It has to be like, one side will do it the right way, the other people are not there yet. You would hope that it could change sort of the dynamics. And actually, I'll tell you something. Actually, I think it's maybe it's not good enough, but it's good. Let's put it this way. Because I think if it's done with sincerity and I think the why will come out, even if you don't agree with what they're saying. You will establish that people actually love the church. I mean, that's important. Right? And that's a if I know that you are criticizing me because you love me, even if I don't accept your criticism, maybe I'm more able to accept your criticism if now I know that you love me. Somehow but not knowing that, and there's no way for me to establish that unless I see you, I see your passion and so on. Then so in other words, maybe it's a prelude to the healthier exchange that's really open on both sides.
And in preparation for this conversation, if we're saying that either side can be, like you said, the prelude. Yes, ideally both sides come in, right, with an open heart and an open mind. But if we're saying at least one side needs to prepare in this way, what's the preparation? Is it intellectual? Is it spiritual? Is it emotional? Is it everything? Like what does one do to sit down before they have a conversation about something that is trying to bridge the fringe?
So actually, I think not having expectations is important. In other words, you go to the discussion not expecting an outcome. If you're expecting an outcome, then that forces, sort of, well, it will get you disappointed and it will force an outcome. So I think if this is the sort of if the discussion is approached with just trying to find out what the other side will react or how they think, if it's just about discovery of each side, without necessarily saying we'll come out of this discussion with a decision on the parking spaces, decision about whatever. Maybe that's the first thing. So in other words, again, you go talk to your graduate student, not expecting to write the paper as a result, but actually just find out how they think. And then I think that's maybe the first preparation is can we go into this discussion to not with an agenda necessarily, but with or the only agenda is to get them to know us better and to know them better, just to establish this rapport, if you want. I think that's probably the side that is asking for this discussion should just go into it that way, as opposed to, well, we're asking the discussion because we'll have a set of 10 questions and come back, actions. Here's my demand list. Unless you do that stuff, I want to discuss this demand list. So take it ahead of time. This is what we're going to talk about. I think that you can do that, but that sort of sets us against them, as opposed to trying to, or me preaching to them or they're preaching to me, versus trying to just develop an empathy for sort of the other side. And that's a precondition, I think, for both sides to sort of change and sort of come up to something that is more sensible. Yeah, I think the point I made earlier about being in touch is very important. I mentioned something about politics and discussions I have here in our household about. I often go and listen to news and read articles by the people that I don't agree with at all. It's exactly the opposite. And oftentimes I get the question, why are you reading that crap? Right? And believe me, it's not easy. It's not, but I think that's exactly what I should be reading. I mentioned something about being a graduate student coming to Harvard and so on. I felt totally sort of unprepared to engage with them. And maybe the right answer, well, maybe some right answer, it's not the right answer, but is why are you even sitting and talking to people who are atheists or questioning your faith? Maybe you shouldn't be there. I think that would have been a natural defense. It's like, well, if they're going to make you doubt, then you shouldn't be there. As opposed to, okay, I'll read, I'll ask for God to help me understand and be better. And it took me, I don't know, a year. Actually, I read a lot of stuff about Christianity. And I felt very good after I read it, because I realized there's answers to all that. That just, that's very biased. And I realized that actually I have the answer. It's just that I didn't know that's, you know how it is, the screw tape letters, the argument. I mean, this is exactly it. It's like, if you know how the other side thinks, then you would be better at convincing them, right? So the point is, are we learning about each side, so that we may be, I mean, even if I believe I'm right, okay, well, you really have to sit through and understand what they come from and everything in order to be more convincing when you actually try to make the argument. So to me, that is important. And um, in terms of preparing for this, want to prepare for is like, am I willing actually to am I going into this with and not an expectation, but I'm ready. It's okay if I come out of it thinking, well, I was wrong, or maybe I should change what I would expect.
Yeah, and I think the hardest thing to do is to do that when the other person isn't.
Yes, I agree. That's hard.
But it's still worth doing, even if the other person isn't doing it, even if you get criticized for it, even if the
Yes.
only thing that results from it is you getting reviled and
No, but actually, I think there is also a selfish reason to do it. You will be better at making your case if you do it. In other words, um, the, right? I mean, I think you're right. It's harder, but it's also better for you.
Hmm.
It's harder on you, but you are gonna come out of it as a better advocate for whatever it is that you're gonna push for. Because if your advocacy was 80% effective, now it's gonna be 95% effective because you actually you see how they can come at you. It's the screw tape letters sort of thing that I was just telling you, right? By discussing things with them, even if it's harder on you, because they're not approaching it at all with maybe the right mindset and so on, is you will get to be better at making your case. Having been sort of having seen so how things develop in a discussion or
I want to disagree with you, but
you do. Wow. Okay.
but I hate that you're right. I'm upset that you're right.
Oh, don't say that. Come on. No, disagree. What is
No, like I mean, let's say, like, instead of talking to you, where again it's always been like just very comfortable and very like, no, I don't know why you think that, but have you looked at it this way? And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, you're right. Um, and I'm talking to somebody else instead, where it's like either talking into an ether where anything that you say just sort of floats away, or you're talking to um, a whack-a-mole where anything that you say just gets slammed down. And have we considered, no, we don't say that, and like, oh, you just have to say blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, manish, it's okay. um and those are very difficult conversations, and I'll be honest, I don't want to have them. And you're making the argument like, no, you should want to have them. It makes you better to have these
yeah, it
conversations.
will make you better. I actually believe in that.
And I want to be like, no, no, that
Mina, I'll give you the proof. How many? Okay, you don't think of yourself as young, but you'll believe me, you're much younger than me, and I
thank you,
consider you
thank you, thank
absolutely.
you.
Yeah, yeah. So,
شايف
well,
شايف
so
شايف
I
الشورت.
see, I see, I see. Well, mine would be 1960 something. So, um, but I'm going to say this. This is sad, and it really hurts me to say it. Even how many people from your generation are not part of the church as they should? Okay, and it saddens me because I'm not talking about um, uh, I'm talking the abstract. It's people I know. Okay, it's people that. How many of them went through what you are going through, and maybe many of us have questions, activism, for lack of a better word, love that you want to sort of change things, and were a little bit impatient or didn't do what it takes. And the answer was, it's never going to change. Fine, I'm just going to, whatever. Okay. And so, slowly but sort of steadily sort of lose the touch. And I'm asking the question rhetoric. The number is large. Like we lost, there's a people who are lost. And if you think about it, what keeps you is the fact that you actually are more connected, even though you don't agree, even though you're pushing back, even though it's uncomfortable for you, even though you feel it's almost unfair. Like you can put all these arguments. But the reason you are more effective is because you know sort of how, you know, that you have engaged in discussions, even if the other side doesn't go about it the same way you want to. It makes you more effective. So these people who, let's say, I'm saying now, are not part of the church, have they been effective in changing the church? No, they left. Imagine if more of them stayed. Imagine if more of them are like yourself, or like, you know, people who are doing these sort of groups, however fringe other people may think they are. Okay, if there were more people like you who are, for lack of a better word, agents of change who just don't want to go away. You know what I mean, right? It's like, just go away. I'm not going away. I'm just going to be a pain in your neck. I'm just sitting here. Okay. So the point is,
but I like liturgy. I want to keep coming back.
well, no, not just because of that. It's actually because I love the church so much, and you know, it's going to take a while, and it doesn't have to be in my lifetime. But I'm sticking to it. So I think that's what gives you. You are more effective doing this because you are engaged in these discussions. You're not going to be effective if you don't discuss stuff. Right?
And you're saying if the discussions were easy, or if you avoided the tension of these discussions, then.
Well, I think somebody who was honest about what they believe in think if the discussion was easy or was not, it was just superficial, they're not gonna, it's not worth it. So in other words, I think that's part of it.
Again, I want to find a way to disagree with you, because I don't like what you're saying, right? It's
why don't you like it?
You're correct, and it's unfortunate that you're correct, that this is the reality that we're in. And it's one of, again, going back to the paradox thing, where it's like the resurrection comes from the cross, right? The joy comes from this, right? So he who has and she who has not suffered does not know true joy, right? Because happiness is different from joy. So I don't know if you were there. I don't think you were, for Anna Mina's.
No, I didn't, unfortunately. Yeah.
No, I mean, you have to listen to the recording.
Do you have it? I'll
yeah. I will send it to you. This was one of the best lessons / discussions / clarifications. I mean, she absolutely blew my mind with what she was saying. And she said it's different from happiness, because happiness has a reason, right? I'm happy because, right? Joy doesn't need a reason. And she walks us through why suffering leads to joy. And she says, basically, if you're able to be joyful and feel God's presence in like the worst situations, then you're like St. Paul in Philippians, where he says, I've learned to be full and to be hungry, of be up and down and left and like, and I've learned that I'm capable, and this is the misunderstanding of 4:13, that it's not, oh, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, meaning like I can be Batman. Like, no, you can't be Batman. You can be Jesus, right? You can be like Christ, who suffered, and in response to reviling did not revile in return, right? You can be joyful that there's this mission, right, that transcends your own suffering. So again, I wish I could disagree with you and say, no, like it's good for the conversation to be easy, and it's good for the other person to be easily convinced. And no, this whack-a-mole conversation of like, no, I'm just going to beat down anything that you say, or this ether conversation where it just sails off into the distance and you have no idea where it landed. You're right. Again, like, just like Christ in Gethsemane, he's not like excited about the next day, like, oh, tomorrow we're gonna save humanity, we're excited. No, he's like, man, is this really happening? But when it does really happen and it's transformed in the resurrection to joy, then it has meaning. And I think that's right. And I think, again, I don't like the fact that you're right, but I do think that you are. And I personally, I don't know if somebody else has, but I personally don't have a disagreement or a counter argument to your statement that these are conversations that need to be had, even if they seem to be unilateral.
They need to be had. They may or may not come to resolutions, or even both sides can still continue. But
Right.
I think they are necessary for healthy change. I think that's probably
Right.
the right way to say it. And I just want to say something else, which is there is an element of faith here. So I just want to go back to this point, which is when I go in a discussion with somebody that I'm not talking about faith as in a Christian faith or faith in God or anything like that, but it's faith in the community, faith in the people I'm speaking with. There's an element of faith that that my efforts are not going to be in vain, which on both sides, right? So I think the fact that there is no resolution for something is not negative. It's you have to have faith that change will happen and the right things will happen. It may not be in time for you to be happy about it because there's a reason for it, but you have faith that this will change, and it may be in my next generation, it may be next year, it may be tomorrow, but it's sort of that expectation and faith in the others, right? I think it's key, because if you don't have that, then you're not going to approach these things at all with the right mindset. That's important. Yeah, if it's easy, it wouldn't be worth doing. Maybe the other way to say it. If my discussion with my graduate student about proving a paper, if it's easy, then maybe the work is not good enough to be published. It has to be hard. You have to sweat through it, and it's through this that real progress is made. The things that are easy they're great. They make us feel good. It's almost like, but I don't know if they're going to be the right agents or the catalysts for change. Let's put it this way, are difficult discussions.
That came up with Mike Gabor, because we were talking about Canonia Ventures, and yeah, if it was easy, it would have been done already. like forget it would not be worth doing. Like, it would have been done already, right? Oh, we're thinking of pouring water into a cup. It's like, what? like it's been done a million times, right? But because it's difficult, number one, it hasn't been done, and number two, it's worth doing. Speaking of which, we have a campaign on Giving Tuesday for Canonia Ventures, and we have organized a pretty impressive team of people to
this coming Tuesday, the Tuesday.
So Giving Tuesday is going to be the Tuesday after Thanksgiving.
After Thanksgiving, okay.
I'm probably going to post this conversation with you at some point this week. I'm going to call it Mustache All-Star Week, because it's going to be like you and Ray Malika and Yusuf Hanna and Father Brian Dunkel, who's one of my professors from BC, like just super high level. So it's going to be All-Star Week and Alex, because, I'm also going to post Alex this week, but he doesn't really fit the all-star category.
I don't know what to say. Strike one of the stars out. That will be me. I'm looking forward to it. And by the way, I saw the Canonia Venture. You guys had a post on social media about the guy that you just funded in impressive. I actually want to find out more because it's not going back to expectation, typical, whatever. I didn't expect that Corona Venture would support something in that space. Really, I'm looking forward to hear more. It's great.
Yeah, we've got a lot of business partners on the website, and one of our team members, again, like the team is unbelievable. One of our team members, Vivian, suggested doing this like back in January, February. She said, why don't we have a business partner of the month? And we were like,
yeah, good.
Like, there's no, like we have a business partner of the month, and we've actually been posting one since March, and they're all on the website. And in December, we're going to have a business partner of the year, which is very exciting. But that's not going to be the focus of Giving Tuesday. For Giving Tuesday, we're going to highlight all of the partners, and we have some new videos coming out. Yeah, hopefully we can raise some more money, get some more monthly donations, which we're grateful for. So we're excited about it.
All right, I'm looking forward to it.
So thank you again for everything that you've taught me over the years. I think we've had another discussion that makes me go, okay, now I need to go start from scratch again.
Oh, don't say that, come
on. But just to summarize, I think we started with a conversation on coming in from above versus having a peer conversation, and how we need to get better at as a community of having more, collegial, open-ended conversations that come with a respect for questions rather than a dogmatic, let me give you the answer. I think that we discussed fringe groups and how they're only fringe in the perception, and if we embrace people and engage them with conversation, then maybe these labels can sort of melt away, because as we've learned, conservatives, liberals, this, that, the other, like, we have a lot more in common than we think we do, and it's not impossible to find common ground if we have dialogue. And the hardest part of the conversation was the last one for me, where dialogue is something that we need to prepare ourselves for, that you don't have expectations, that you're there just to express ideas. And if the other person is whack-a-mole with everything that you say, just defeating it, or floating out into the ether where you don't know if anything's sticking, and it's just going out into nothingness, and you feel like it's completely ineffective, not only is that a responsibility, but that's something that is a benefit.
Well said.
It's hard to swallow, but I unfortunately both accept and agree that this aligns with reality. So any parting words for us? Any parting wisdom?
Not really. Thank you. This is thank you for doing this. I didn't know what to expect, but I enjoyed it.
Expectations are everything,
yeah,
huh?
Yeah.
Good. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.